What's going on, everybody? This is Nothing But Bangers, aka MBB, aka Bangers, aka the new meta is here. And the big question everybody is kind of asking, how much did the meta really change? Especially with the introduction of arguably the most powerful item card that we've ever seen in the game, Rare Candy, being introduced. So in this video, I'm going to go over some of the top decks from Ursi's most recent tournament in the new meta, the biggest tournament so far. And I've got an interesting comparison with a breakdown of the top 64 from this week and the previous week. So let's hop in. This video is something that could drag out for a very long time. So what I'm going to do is try to go through this very quickly as much as I can. And obviously, I try to use chapters as well, so make sure to utilize those. And as always, if you really like content like this or just enjoy supporting the channel, definitely hit that thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't so you can be notified when new videos come out. And hey, if you don't mind leaving a comment about some of the different statements and the different numbers from this video, that helps tremendously. So diving into the meta breakdown, and I've got a graph and a chart that I pulled from Reddit, so we'll talk about that as well. But just the big thing to kind of point out so far is that Solgaleo Soglasis and Skarmory seem to be the most played deck. You've also got Charizard and Incineroar being paired together, not separated, as being the second most played deck. You got Giratina Darkrai, you've got Giratina Snorlax, Lucario Rampardos, Charizard EX, and then there's maybe a little bit of spice to go along with that, but I think the big thing is that may be just Raid Boss Charizard. Then you've got Decidueye EX and Meowscarada. You've got some Arceus Crobat. You've got some Magnezone Oricorio, some Lycanroc Rampardos. You got just Incineroar EX. And then my favorite personally, which is Meowscarada Serena, because Serena is just a queen. She slays. But let's dive into the standings. So at the end of 8 rounds of Swiss, the top 2 players were playing Charizard, Incineroar, and then Arceus Crobat. You also see a lot of Giratina. And I've said this before in many of my videos since the card came out. I do think that Giratina EX is probably the #1 Pokemon, remember, just Pokemon card, just Pokemon, that we've seen in the game's history so far. It continues to carry decks to the very top of the meta, and it's just a dominating card. Then you also get into some of the other decks in the top 64 that are featuring Greninja, which if you wanted to choose one stage 2 that has been relevant in just about every single meta, obviously you've got Charizard, but Greninja is right there as well as one of the best support stage 2s that we've seen in this game's history. You've got a lot of different decks that have been catapulted to spotlight. Obviously you got that Rampardos, but there's multiple variants. You still got a little bit of Gallade, but again, Giratina just flooded the top 64 as you scroll through this list and just continue to see little bits of Giratina icons. And then hey, that's no shade at Darkrai as well. Darkrai EX continues to be one of the best EXs that we've ever seen as well. But let's dive into some of these decks, and I'll give a little bit of a brief synopsis. This is one of the top competitors, TR Ob. This was the list that they played with Charizard and Incineroar. You can see a 1-0-1 lineup of the Incineroar family, and then a 2-1-2 lineup of Charizard. And keep in mind, this is Shining Revelry Charizard. Genetic Apex Charizard has basically finally been phased out for the most part, which is maybe a good thing, maybe a bad thing. Rest in peace, Genetic Apex Charizard. When you take a look at the rest of the deck, it's pretty obvious what it's trying to do. It's trying to get a stage 2 out and then sweep you while maybe having a follow-up to the first Charizard, with that being Incineroar. So again, you want to get that Charizard out early, stoke, get to 5 energy, start hitting for 150. Then you want to have Incineroar hopefully being built on the bench, or worst case, you've got another Charizard, because again, usually it does take a attack with Stoke to get a Charizard up and going. There was a lot of disruption in all of these decks as well. You'll see Red Card has definitely continued to be a presence, and probably more than ever with all of these players for the most part, playing combos. We are now in a combo era of Pokemon Pocket, but again, you've got Giant Capes, you've got Iono, you've got Pokemon Coms, obviously Rare Candy, Double Lily. So you do see a little mix and matching of mostly new cards, and some of the older sets are starting to kind of get a little bit phased out. The next deck that we'll talk about is from Pepin_MX. This was Darkrai. This was Arceus with Crobat and Carnivine. It does have the ability to go very aggressive early game with Carnivine while hopefully popping off with that Crobat on the bench and Arceus on the bench. Then you've also got Mars as a supporter, so no red card, but you do see that continuous trend of disruption. They're trying to disrupt combos. And you've got one Leaf to help get that Arceus out of the active, because I would argue now more than ever it really hurts to start off with Arceus EX in this meta. You also have one Iono. That's one thing that you also see a lot of in these Stage 2 decks, double Rare Candy, because that's how you get Crobat out. You'll notice they're playing a 2-0-2 lineup of the Crobat family. So pretty straightforward deck. Again, just got boosted with Rare Candy because now hopefully Crobat comes on a little bit faster. All right, getting to another deck. This is the new iteration, or one of the new iterations of Dark Tina. You've got double Darkrai, double Giratina. You've got one red, one Cyrus, one Mars, one Leaf, one Sabrina, one Pokemon Center Lady. And the Pokemon Center Lady may be more relevant now than ever, considering you do see a little bit more status effects. One of the big things that I would point out about this deck, and this is Hanamon. So Hanamon, fantastic player, has won Ursi's, I think, multiple times, very good player. But the one thing that I would really think is gonna, that I would change is I would change Rocky Helmet to Poison Barb, simply because there's a lot of Guzma that should be played, and as the meta continues on, I think Guzma will continue to see traction, and I would rather make my opponent waste a retreat and get that poison off their Pokemon, and as opposed to a Rocky Helmet. Personally, and in the mirror, I think that it's something that is very good as well, the poison. Even though it's 10 damage versus 20 from one attack, I still think you end up getting roughly the same amount of damage a lot of the time. And then the last thing that I'll point out about Poison Barb as opposed to Rocky Helmet is that if Oricorio decides to try to lock you out of the game, you obviously have Darkrai pings, but you also have the potential for Poison Barb to do some poison tick damage and speed up the clock on that Oricorio. So again, very straightforward Mars and red card in this deck list. So again, you're just seeing a continuation of disruption to try to block some of those combos from those Rare Candy decks. And it just brings me back to fundamentals. One of the very first Pocket videos that I made about not playing Professor's Research turn 1, going first, right? If you don't think that it's going to advance your game state, or if it doesn't prevent you, or if it doesn't prevent you from getting donked. I think that now more than ever, it's important to kind of think about, do I really need to rip this first turn Professor's Research? Because there's so much disruption, and you can't evolve on your turn 1. So I think a lot of the time holding that research might be an option that a lot of players should entertain. But the rest of the deck, pretty straightforward. Moving on, this is 9 Clan. This is the Lycanroc Rampardos deck that we've seen in some of the previous tournaments like Frog EX. You'll notice they are completely bypassing the Stage 1 and basically saying, hey, I just want Rampardos and Rare Candy. I want that one extra deck slot, or 2 in some cases, to be another supporter or trainer. If you haven't heard about Lycanroc, it's very sweet. You're always going to open with Rockruff, so you can use Signs of Evolution to search your Lycanroc, put it in your hand, evolve it, and then hopefully you can do 100 damage to an opposing Pokemon that's maybe an EX and really put them on a clock. While you're doing that, you can hopefully find the pieces to your fossil to find Rampardos. But no disruption in this deck. You'll notice there is one Lily to help Rampardos stay alive a little bit longer, and 2 Giant Capes. And Giant Cape can help Rampardos stick around an extra turn, so that's huge. But again, just kind of looking at this deck list, it's pretty straightforward. You do have that one Cyrus to go ahead and bring things back into the active. You've got one Pokeball, which is something that is they're basically trying to utilize as many cards as they can by not having double Pokeball and having one potential dead card. And the thing about one Pokemon communication is if you use that Pokemon communication, sometimes you can guarantee that you're going to get that Rampardos that you need. So again, very straightforward deck, very powerful deck. Rampardos is just about as good as a lot of us thought it would be. This is Atsu's deck. This is going to be a Greninja Wigglytuff deck with some Oricorio technology. Now, I haven't seen this person play, but I would be willing to go out on a limb and say that they are most likely playing only water energy. However, I have spoken to some people in different Discords and in my private messages, and they have stated the desire to play double energy. So, who knows? Maybe we get a chance to see it live on stream when Ursi's Top 64 gets broadcasted on Twitch and YouTube. Definitely check that out if you can. But when you look at this deck, it's basically utilizing rare candy, and you'll notice this is one of two decks. I believe this is one of two decks in the entire Top 64 that's only playing one rare candy. There were about 39 decks, if I remember correctly, and I counted correctly, that went ahead and utilized rare candy. I will come back and correct that number if I'm wrong, but I believe, actually no, there were 39 decks that could use rare candy, and I believe 34 of them actually did. I think like 5 decks played Magnezone, so they didn't play rare candy because they didn't need to skip that stage 1, right? So again, like rare candy took up a lot of the Top 64, and this is a great example of another deck that's kind of boosted by rare candy, even though it's only playing 1. And you can see that the game plan is probably get Greninja out as fast as possible, be willing to use Wigglytuff to keep it alive longer. Personally, I don't think that this deck is very strong, but again, with a performance like it did and like it had, obviously it's got some things going for it. But again, personally, not necessarily thinking that this deck is going to be something that you're going to see in large numbers in tournaments coming forward. This is HD Erikitho. Not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but I want to make sure that I try to at least give shout outs to these people. This is going to be one of my favorite decks. And if you watched the live stream of the new set when I was streaming, you got to see pretty much this exact deck in action. I didn't have the leaf capes. I had to play giant capes, and I actually played a red card in my variant and double Mallow. So a few different card differences, but I loved this deck. I thought it was fantastic. It was like a mixture of a casino with some fun, and basically you're utilizing rare candy to get that Serena out, hopefully pretty quickly, to start pressuring your opponent's Pokemon. Then you can load up a Serebii on the bench, get it to a ton of energy. It plays a lot like that Raid Executor boss deck, if you remember that from a few formats ago, where basically you were really consistent about getting Executor EX on curve, and then from there you hopefully built up a Serebii and just kept your Executor alive. You're basically doing the same thing here. You're keeping that Serena alive. You're using the Leaf Cape to buff up its HP. You're using Erica and Mallow to continuously keep it healed, and Mallow is a full heal, so you can full heal it, right? Put an energy back on it and start going back to town. So really fun deck, really cool deck. I'm just really happy to see this deck do well in this tournament, even though not a lot of people played it. This is Narumi's Magnezone Oricorio deck. There has been a lot of discussion in some Discord servers that I'm in about the strength of Oricorio decks playing electric energies, and it was really good to see this Magnezone deck prove that it can hang with the big boys and gals, right? But again, Oricorio blocking that EX damage and then Magnezone being able to hit for 110 in a pure one prize deck is very valuable. There is disruption in this deck. I know that it's kind of in the past few decks, I think it's kind of shied. We haven't seen as much disruption, but you do see a Mars in this deck. You're also seeing a Guzma in this deck, which I love Guzma. If you haven't played Guzma, give it a shot as a one-of in some of your decks. It's a fantastic card. Also, it's utilizing Giovanni, and Giovanni can help fix some damage in some situations, so it's definitely something to pay attention to. It's got one Lily to go ahead and have some synergy with that Magnezone, and then 2 giant capes. Pretty much everything else is pretty standard. You got the one Pokemon Center Lady. Obviously, that's a card that can help with status conditions, which again do pop up every now and again in this new meta. But again, very cool deck. I'm glad to see electric decks kind of back on the map. Obviously, for a while, we stopped seeing pure electric decks. For the most part, we started seeing Magnezone get splashed, but this is a good, refreshing sight to see a lot of different types of Pokemon, right? From electric to water to grass to dark to Psychic to Fire, all finally getting some representation, obviously Steel as well. This is Matessa LVO02. They were packing the Meowscarada Decidueye technology, double rare candy in this deck. And again, just kind of continuing the trend of decks that need to utilize rare candy, definitely playing at least one copy, in most decks playing two. You've got the Meowscarada line with the Decidueye technology. The Decidueye is a really interesting mix-up, and you'll see that people are kind of like trying this as opposed to Beedrill. And one of the cool things about Decidueye is you can, because you're playing Grass Energy, you can hit for 80 to set up that 100 snipe, which is very nice. You'll notice there's no Lily in this deck. They chose to run Erica, so I do wonder what this player thinks about playing Lily as opposed to Erica. However, Erica will be live the entirety of the game, whereas Lily will only be live once you hit that stage 2. So you wonder, is the 10 extra HP really worth it? And, I would venture to argue that this player said, no, it's not. I would rather have it live all the time. You got one Sabrina, one Cyrus, and again, one Leaf Cape, one Giant Cape. So I would venture out and say that this is probably somebody who didn't have 2 Leaf Capes because, there's literally just like no reason not to get the extra 10 HP, right? But again, very cool deck, and Decidueye is pretty interesting. I think honestly, the way that I like to play it is probably with Greninja more than Meowscarada, but that doesn't discount what this player was able to do, and it shows that, hey, Decidueye, not a bad card. Maybe it's worth looking at and playing a little bit more. The last deck that we'll talk about before we dive into some data is a deck that is card for card a deck that we saw last format. And this is something that I wanted to make sure that I highlighted because, one, shout out to this person, for Morton98, for saying, I know there's a new set, but you know what? I'm going to play my cards, right? And honestly, I really want to just reiterate this because a lot of people in the community, for whatever reason, like to complain about this deck, like, I want to play the best decks day one. I'm mad that I can't play every deck day one and I don't spend money, or I do spend money and I just don't pull all the cards. I'm unlucky. Well, guess what? You can play an old deck, right, and still top cut one of the biggest tournaments in Pokemon Pocket, right? So I just try to throw things out here like this, and I would just continue to say, this game is, it's got its issues with trading, okay? I'm not going to lie to you, okay? I'm not going to be full on shill. But it's important to know that you can still make the best of your situation, and there's no need to dwell on the negatives about, you can't play the new Solgaleo, I can't play the new blah, 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 Incineroar, blah, Dude, there are ways to play really, really good decks even without brand new cards, okay? And so when you look at this deck list, there's no rare candy. It's playing just the straight up traditional 2-2-2 lineup of the Gallade line. It's playing 2 Hitmonlees, 1 Marshadow, and everything else pretty straightforward, right? So again, don't get so down in the negative. If people are arguing about this and you're around for that argument, I honestly would just leave it alone. Let them be them. But again, just there's so many times that we've seen in this game that it's very friendly for people that are free to play, even if you have terrible luck, as long as you just try to wonder pick and at least try to put some effort into opening daily packs and doing, what you're supposed to do to play the game. But again, shout out to Morton98. Good luck in Top Cut. And I think that this is one of 2 Gallade decks in the entire Top Cut. So that's also worth noting. I think the other version, or the other variant, is a Rampardos with 1 rare candy, if I remember right. It might be 1 rare candy. That's the other deck that I think was 1 rare candy. So let's dive into some numbers. On the right side of the screen, I've got the last tournament of last meta from the Ursi Day Pocket Weekly tournament. And then I've got on the left side a graphic that was posted by practical_TAS. So shout out to them for making this graphic, or whoever made this graphic and posted it on Reddit. And so big shout out to them. But I just kind of want to compare and bring up the debate about, did the meta really change? And I don't know. I'll let you decide after we kind of run through some of these numbers. So overall, in top 64, the last weekend of the meta, Darkrai and Giratina made up 50% of the top cut. And overall, it was one of the most played decks in the entire tournament. I think it took up 33% of the meta, right? So when you take a look at what it is from this current ongoing tournament that may be finished by the time you're watching this, there were 14 Giratina Darkrai decks in the top cut. And granted, it took up the largest amount of the top 64, but there was only an overall usage of 7.2%. So the usage rate dropped tremendously on Giratina Darkrai. Okay. However, it had one of the best conversion rates of getting to top cut. So Giratina Darkrai is not dead. Darktina is not dead. It's not going anywhere. Although we do have, Oricorio, there are ways to play around Oricorio. And in my opinion, those ways are Poison Barb and Darkrai, right? So that's something to keep in mind. The other thing that I would also say is this is something to kind of think about. In the first weekend of just about every meta, we see a ton of diversity. So maybe in 2 weeks, things kind of change a little bit. And we don't see this much variety because there's a ton of variety in this top cut. But again, it's just something worth thinking about and talking about. The next played deck, or the next most used deck in the top 64 for this week was Solgaleo Skarmory, and although it didn't have great analytics, great numbers as far as win percentage, it still took up a lot of spaces in the top cut, and part of it was just because a lot of people played it, but it's obviously got some strength as well. The second deck from the second deck from last week that had the most top cuts was Gyarados and Manaphy. Gyarados Manaphy is basically just gone, right? Like, it is basically just like Thanos snapped, right? But again, you do see some similar numbers, right? 14% for Gyarados Manaphy, 15% for Solgaleo Skarmory. Although it is worth noting that the usage rate overall was really similar as well. 13.5% for Gyarados Manaphy, and then you've got 12.5% for Solgaleo Skarmory. So roughly kind of like same for the second most played deck. So that's also pretty interesting as well. But let's keep going. So we got Giratina EX and Snorlax, which is a really cool deck. I didn't highlight that, but it's basically playing, I think a lot of the time it's playing Greninja, Snorlax, Giratina, which is really spicy. That's a variant that I've seen. But again, took up 6 spots in the top 64, so that's respectable. Then you go down. You got Charizard and Incineroar, so 6 spots in this weekend's Ursi Day tournament. And then you flip over to the other side again. Charizard and Moltres took up 7 spots in last weekend's tournament in a different meta. So you're still seeing Charizard hang around there. However, it is no longer the Apex Charizard. It is now the Stoke Charizard from Shining Revelry. Then you've got Magnezone Oricorio. It had an overall usage rate of 2.1% and still got 3 people into the top cut, which is pretty good, right? In terms of usage rate to converting to a top cut. Like, that's actually really, really good, right? I think it's one of it's one of the few decks that had 1% or higher and got into the top cut, right? Like some decks, there's just a different way to look at some of these metrics, and like some of the other decks like Arceus Darkrai, Aerodactyl EX and Rampardos, Arceus EX and Crobat, and Lucario Rampardos, they all had like under 5% of usage rate, but they all found at least 2 people were able to bring that to top 64. So basically what I'm trying to say is, even though those decks didn't have as much representation, they still did pretty well, decently well, getting to the top 64. The one exception would maybe be Lucario Rampardos. Maybe that deck didn't perform as great as the numbers are saying, right? Maybe the conversion rate was a little bit low. But again, it's one of those things where we're probably still trying to figure out like just how good Rampardos is. We all know that it's busted if you get it out like right away. But like, what's the best way to play Rampardos? Is it Lycanroc? Is it Lucario? Is it Marshadow? That's the big question mark, right? But again, just kind of looking at the rest of the decks in the top cut, you got a lot of one-of decks that did, I won't spend too much time talking about, but I just want to go ahead and make sure that you guys can all see that graphic on the screen, just in case you want to look at it, pause the video, whatever. But again, it's really cool to see this much variety, and I don't know that we're going to see this much variety in 2 weeks or whatever. But again, the first week of the format, 1,000 people in this tournament, which is great because the number of people in tournaments went up. Right, we still had a new season of ranked, but it seems like people were excited to bring their brews with rare candy to this tournament. And again, like I think 34 of the decks are playing 2 rare candies, if I did my math right. And somebody may correct me in the comments, but I think 34 of the top 64 decks were packing 2 rare candies. So has the meta changed? You know, that was the question that I kind of started with, right? Well, you definitely don't see as much Magnezone Meowscarada. You definitely don't see Gyarados, right? You still see Rampardos. You still see Arceus Carnivine, right? You still see some Meowscarada just in different forms. You know, so like, and I think you still see some of these one-up decks like Giratina and Mewtwo, right? But, you know, again, I would argue that, yes, the meta has changed, and I would argue that the game is like drastically different than a week ago. You know, I think the biggest complaint people will have is that rare candy, like really early in the game, feels very lopsided, right? Like if you get rare candy and your opponent doesn't, like it feels very lopsided, right? And vice versa, same thing. And Darkrai and Giratina still being very, very good is something that a lot of people may be kind of like disappointed in, because like they want to see that deck just get like, you know, destroyed into the ground or whatever. But I would argue that like now more than ever, the deck has way more counters, right? And also now more than ever, like that deck itself still has to adapt to brand new cards like Oricorio. So like I do think that like the game has changed. I do think that rare candy, you know, whether it's a good thing for the game or a bad thing, I don't know the answer to that. I truly don't know. I knew that it would be powerful. I knew that it would be as advertised. Okay, like shout out to Raven. I love Raven. I love chatting with Raven. I love going into screams. I'm a big Raven fan. But the one thing that I would say is like we had a little bit of a discussion about, is rare candy like overhyped? Is it overrated? And like before the card even came out, I was just like, no. And after the first weekend of this 1,000+ person tournament and like obviously the Frog EX tournament, I would say yes, like it wasn't overrated. It wasn't overhyped. The card delivered, and you are seeing some of the best decks in the game all find ways to utilize rare candy. Obviously there's exceptions, but again, like I think that the card was as good as advertised. And you know, again, whether or not that's good for the game or bad for the game, like, hey, I mean, that's your own personal opinion and like completely up to you. But I just saw an article that Pokemon Pocket has made more money up to this point in the game than Pokemon Go. So, you know, I would take that for what you will. And like, keep in mind, like this game is not whale hunting, right? They're not being the Marvel Snap of monetization, right? So like, again, I would just say that, hey, if you enjoy the game, like play more of it, right? Keep playing it. If you don't enjoy the way the game is, like maybe find different ways to enjoy the game. Maybe don't grind on ranked, right? Like, but again, like I do think that the game is different. I'm very excited to see how the meta continues to play out. And as far as predicting a winner for the Ursi Day tournament, man, you know what? If I put myself on the spot here, I hadn't thought of this answer, but give me. You know what? Give me a Giratina EX and Snorlax deck to win it all. Give me that. I don't know. That's my prediction. I'll go with that. But again, I have no idea what's going to happen. I'm going to look forward to keeping tuned in to the tournament, and I hope you do too. But again, I didn't want to make this video super long. It's going to end up being like 30 minutes or whatever. I'm so sorry. Hopefully the chapters helped, and I hope that you enjoyed listening to me talk about the game. And again, if you want to support the channel or just kind of help my channel continue to grow, hit that like button. You know, hit that subscribe button if you haven't. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think about the current state of the game. And I will see you next time. Peace.